Hello, all you hardcores out there. How you doing? It's Russ here from Porky's Corner, the biggest gob in sport. Today I'm joined by Rico from London. How you doing, Rico?
I'm good, thank you. How are you, mate?
I'm all right. What do you think to me profile picture today, Rico?
Looks like a certain Mr. Andrew there.
It's little Andy Pandy from Dennerby. How's it
I know,
going,
I
Andy?
know,
Were you village people, Tash?
I know. He was a bit of a class clown when he used to be on the Matchroom shows, wasn't he? With Terry Harper all the time.
Yeah, we don't hear much from him now, do we? What has he
No,
fell
we
out with
don't.
Eddie?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, he's not of use to Eddie anymore, is he? So that's the main thing.
He looks to me like he's sort of siding towards Team Bricktop at the moment. With all what I'm hearing behind the scenes, what do you think, Rico?
Um, yeah, I guess as a trainer and manager, you have to go where your fighters are wanted, and if they're not
Yeah,
wanted by Eddie, you have to go somewhere else. So I don't really blame him for that, but
yeah,
yeah, I think that's where people get so loyal to Eddie and think that they're friends, but actually they're utilities to him. And same goes for every boxing promoter. It's not just Eddie. I mean, if you've got good fighters, you go onto their shows, but the law fighters are not very good at the moment. So
yeah,
Eddie focusing on non-British fighters largely and some of the Sims Essex crowd. Because if you think about Steffi Bull's fighters, there's not really you can't really put on a show in Sheffield at the moment. There's probably not a big enough draw.
yeah,
So you're gonna have to do it in Liverpool, or you're gonna have to do it in Manchester, or you're gonna have to do it in London. So Steffi's not particularly useful.
yeah. It must be awkward for him though, having to break bread with Bricktop. With Jason Cunningham's situation that's going on and all that. It
Yeah,
must be a bit awful. Not awkward, but he must think, oh God, I feel a bit odd here having to deal with him.
I think all of them just go overboard when they start praising Matchroom, and then that's the thing that becomes embarrassing, right?
Yeah, when they've got to go back and cross the street.
Exactly. You can just maintain professionalism, and you don't have to be on IFL telling how one promoter is the best in the world and so forth.
Do you think that's where a lot of them make mistakes? They're trying to align themselves with one promoter, not knowing that because a lot of them will get a bit inexperienced, and down the line, that promoter knows they've got to come back to them. A bit like when I used to say to Dennis, don't you feel a bit angry that White Rhino's not here and they're milking him after you put the money in? And he's like, no, because they'll come back. This is they always do.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a time when Matchroom was so dominant, maybe 4 or 5 years ago when they were still with Sky, that you thought the money train's going to keep coming and I need to keep as close to them as possible. But I think some trainers and managers just go so overboard with the whole thing that it's it's sort of beyond what's necessary. Like Eddie's
Yeah,
not going to be looking at interviews and saying, "Oh, they did a nice interview about me and they praised me, so I'm going to put their fighters on the show." It's probably 1 or 2% of the whole equation. Um, but you can maintain professionalism. If you think about like Joe Gallagher when he had Beefy Smith on Warren shows and some of his other
yeah.
fighters and some of the guys on Matchroom shows. Uh, he sort of was straight down the line and behaved in a manner that's appropriate rather than being a cheerleader for a promotional outfit.
Yeah. Do you think that where Sam Jones might mess up because he seems to come out every Monday? There's a Monday mass or a Sunday sermon defending and agreeing with Bricktop or Eddie Hills, and I'm not saying. Well, I am saying he's an arse licker in my opinion, but I'm not saying that he's doing it to arse lick. He's doing it to keep his fighters in mix. But do you feel that he might go over
Well,
the
who
top?
are his fighters? He's
Well,
got a few, right? But he doesn't have that many. It's more about keeping himself in the limelight, isn't it?
maybe that as well. But every Monday, I see him doing a sermon for somebody, whether it's Queensby or Macho, and you don't know which camp he's in, do you?
Well, I don't. Well, he's in the what's the outfit called these days? Ex Probellum. I can't remember.
Well, at least go on, sorry.
Disrupt promotions. He's clearly in that outfit, but I think he just goes way over the top, and he and he just does stuff and says stuff which is soundbitey and clickbaity and goes overboard. He just likes to be in the limelight. That's what he thinks. The more I'm in the limelight, the better it's people are going to know me, and then I can get their fighters.
Well, at least Steffi assigned himself to Eddie, and he were against anything Queensbury. So at least he's shown how two-faced he can be now that Eddie doesn't need him.
Yeah, exactly.
At least Steffi's playing his part well, playing it better than you, Sam Jones, trying to be in two camps. Don't you know you're supposed to pick one camp and then do dirty on them when they don't need them? Right,
That
hey?
Yeah, I mean it's a cruel game, right? Promoters are going to get rid of you, or you're going to change promote. You're going to work with other promoters. It's one or the other. I mean, eventually everybody gets rid of managers or stops working with them when they don't have useful fighters.
Yeah, it's what annoys me is when I'm watching on telly and I'm seeing people I know very well high-fiving people who I know that their personal opinion on that person means is a straight tosser. High-fiving them. Do you think you're going to see me at a show high-fiving people that I've dug out? You've not a chance, is there, Rico?
No, no, that's not going to happen. And also, I'm not. Boxing's very immature as a sport, isn't it? That people are constantly. It's like a soap opera in many ways, that people are constantly stabbing each other in the back and pretending to be friends and falling out with other people and then hugging the next day. And it's a bit immature as a sport. It's not because it's not run properly, is it? It's just run by egomaniacs essentially.
Yeah. Rico, I want to pull you about pay-per-view. Now, every now and then we mention pay-per-view on here. What pay-per-view is supposed to be for. Now, many years ago, Dennis pulled somebody, were telling me at HBO, and we got talking about pay-per-view. This is when it was in its early stages in UK. And he said to Dennis, this guy, listen, pay-per-view is supposed to be for one of them fights where you say, come on, we can't miss this fight, let's get home for it. Now everything seems to be pay-per-view. Do you remember a few years ago when Sky were tiptoeing around the idea of putting pay-per-view on Kessler and Kessler Froch rematch, and it was like a month drawn out job, wasn't it, for verdict on it? And that, do you think times have changed in the last 10, 11 years?
I thought the zone said the pay-per-view's dead. Isn't that the case? The zone has done no pay-per-views because pay-per-view's dead. Wasn't that the promise that we were
Yeah, that
giving?
was the promise. And then
That was the promise,
9 months later, they flipped it on its head, didn't they? And said, oh, no, it's
yeah.
pay-per-views where it's at.
Yeah, I think pay-per-views for events that are must-see. So back in the day, you'd obviously have in the US things like Tyson fighting, which everybody wanted to tune into. I had no issues with some of the big Joshua fights being on pay-per-view or big Fury fights, but generally, fighters shouldn't be fighting a majority of their career on pay-per-view fights, because most of the fights that they are fighting are not pay-per-view. So like routine title defenses or sort of grudge matches of sorts. I don't think, on top of subscriptions that everybody has to pay, and given the cost of living crisis and inflation sort of eroding everybody's cash at the moment, it doesn't make any sense to have so many pay-per-views, because what you're doing is the same thing that football did years ago when it moved over to Sky entirely on BT Sports or TNT, is that less people get to see boxing. So boxing becomes a sport where the working class, who are majority of the fighters and people from lower income households, they're the ones that don't see the fights, the big ones. So why would they get into the sport? So I think it's just a cash grab from the networks and others. And fighter purses have grown so exponentially over the last 5 to 10 years that means that the only way these fighters are getting out of bed is because of pay-per-view. I mean, Chris Eubank Jr., Liam Smith. I mean, in a normal world, if you think about this as in the US context, it's two good fringe world level contenders fighting a rematch after the first one won it conclusively, not leading to a title shot. That wouldn't be pay-per-view. So this is like two older veterans fighting against each other. There's no reason to have that as a pay-per-view.
Yeah, they're actually 2 or 3 years older than what Eubank and Ben, the dads, ages that they retired at.
Yeah,
You see where I'm coming from? So, and there's no belt on line. I mean, at least they fought for world titles, didn't they? Eubank and Ben, the fathers, in their 2 fights, and there were sellout crowds, weren't there? There's no world title, and I mean, Eubank's got a British title to his name out of, and Beefy, obviously, he's a British and Commonwealth champion, but he really were British. They were good, they're good, solid Euro level fighters, aren't they, Rico?
yeah. I mean, but Euro level fight shouldn't be pay-per-views, right?
Yeah, well, that's what we were told back in the day when they were trying to get PERCH Butte as a pay-per-view. Sky were like, no, PERCH Butte, not pay-per-view. If ever there were a case for a pay-per-view, that wasn't it?
Well, I can see the argument both ways, but it doesn't mean still that everything should be pay-per-view. The problem now is that you don't, all the bad fights are on pay-per-view. So you never even seen you never really seen sort of big names fighting against each other or big names in fights unless you're paying. The only reason Joshua Helenius wasn't on pay-per-view was because, White pulled out and Helenius was a last-minute opponent. But even Joshua White as a fight, I know it's probably going to draw interest to a certain degree. Even there's an argument to say that shouldn't have been pay-per-view because it wasn't a world title fight. It's two fighters that's all towards the end of their career in the heavyweight division fighting against each other, and that's not pay-per-view.
What did you think about Eddie and Frank Smith's predictions for White Joshua 2 pay-per-view? Obviously, the fight got cancelled, but their predictions for pay-per-view were as follow. Frank Smith 700,000, Eddie 1 million. Then it went down to Eddie a week later. Eddie would be happy with 500,000, and Frank was saying he think it could do 700,000, and then they were, but more or less agreeing on 600. So it just kept changing all the time, didn't it? Do you think that's because they were getting the results in as the numbers were coming through?
Yeah, but that's the boxing accountants in many ways, right? So most people buy a pay-per-view on the night. They're not going to buy it a week before, right? So,
Yeah.
but I think my barometer has always been, does one of my mates that's a casual fan or one of my mates or somebody from work say, hey, there's the big fight on the weekend? And I never got that sense for Joshua against White too, that people were very excited outside of the boxing world or generally interested. And part of it's that there was no title on the line and it wasn't like an all British title showdown. So Fury against White, which is fought at Wembley, I mean, that got more interest, but even that wasn't at the same level as, say, Joshua Klitschko a few years ago. And nobody spoke about that, in the lead up to the fight, no one outside of boxing was really speaking about it. You didn't see much about that fight in the media. You didn't see a huge amount of interest. And part of that is because they're in the zone, so nobody can see the promos and nobody knows the fight's going on.
Yeah, do you think Eddie backed the wrong horse when he jumped in bed with DAZN?
Potentially, but I wouldn't be surprised if Sky were going to say we're going to slash our boxing budget, so DAZN offered the same that they had before. So I can see why Eddie went there, but ultimately the fighters lose out because DAZN as a platform hasn't taken off as a result of boxing. So people are not subscribing to DAZN to watch the boxing, are they? People didn't move in the same numbers that they probably thought because they've got, say they've got a normal Sky show and I'm just pulling numbers out the air and they have 300,000 people watching a non-pay-per-view show. They probably thought, you know what, over 100,000 of those will subscribe to DAZN in a few months, but I don't think it's even that. A lot of people watch the boxing on Sky because they're home and it's a Saturday night and they already subscribe to Sky and pay 30 quid a month, so they just flick onto that channel and all week they've been pumping up the fight, so they're more interested. Whereas with DAZN now, they don't have any other avenues apart from social media to pump up fights. And most people of the boxing demographic, particularly older people, are not on social media. So how do they know what fights the casual fans of, say, 40, 50 years old, how do they know what fights are going on if they're not constantly on IFL and, looking at what fights are coming up?
Yeah, I suppose, yeah. Interesting. All right, then moving on from pay-per-view then. What do you think to Eddie's carry on this week with that gym? Do you think that they're trying to do some PR on him at moment and Matchroom, donating money to gyms and Cape Crusader with his drug free sport cape on?
Yeah, I mean, they're trying to do something, but I'm not. I mean, if you're meant to do something for social good, then that's good for boxing. If they donated money, I've got no problems with that. But again, I don't think it's going to lead to more people being interested or more people thinking he's a good guy or, Matchroom are doing the right thing. And I think as a whole, I think Matchroom are probably good for the sport, Matchroom boxing, for British boxing. But the problem is that every time they do something that's positive, they make such a song and dance and they talk about an IFL. So it's like it's like somebody donating, imagine your mate does a marathon and you donate 20 quid into that, and then you do a 2-hour episode here talking about how great you are for donating that 20 quid. It's essentially that.
Well, last month on social media, according to analytics, 117 hours Eddie Earn put in interviews. That's a lot in it. In a
Well,
month.
it's clearly to keep his name on the radar, but the challenge is he's speaking to the same audience, right? So if your audience is predominantly the people that watch IFL and these other boxing channels, which are going to be people are going to know of you anyways, and they're going to be watching, they're going to be watching most of the shows. You're just preaching to them. You're not preaching to anybody new.
Do you feel, Rico, now that this 4 or 5 hours a day carry on every single day, it's becoming like a bit of a reality TV program for them now?
Yeah, you know what? It's always been. I think always as Eddie Hearn took over the matchroom boxing side, always what they want to try and do is kind of give a behind the scenes look at what's going on.
Is
But
it
at the end of the
overkill
day,
though now?
yeah, but sorry, let me just cough.
Yeah, go on.
But at the end of the day, I'm just flicking through the fight. So we've got Wood against Warrington, Catrell against Linares, uh, Cameron against Taylor. Those are 3 cards until the end of the year, and Rodriguez against Sonny Edwards in the US, but UK cards. So UK and Ireland. We've got 3 cards announced that are like which have names on them. So I don't, at the your product's all stacking up. If you look at what's been done by Bob Arum, PBC over the last few months, whether it's Inoue against Fulton, whether it's Tank Davis's fights, whether it's Spence against Crawford, those are good fights. They sell themselves, right?
Yeah.
Those are huge events. Whereas on the other hand, these fights are okay. You might watch them, but you're not particularly excited. I mean, Catrell against Linares isn't a good fight. Wood against Warrington, yeah, probably watch it, but these are 2 older fighters. Cameron against Taylor, I think lots of people have been interested in seeing this fight for a while, so people might tune in for that one. But what else do you have? The roster's bare.
Yeah. Joshua's had 13 Sky pay-per-views on Sky alone. Which would you say were best?
God, you'd have to name them all. I mean, Joshua Klitschko's obviously being good. I
Ruiz
think
one.
Ruiz won. So if you think about pay-per-views, which I think should not be in pay-per-views, Joshua Klitschko, Ruiz 2,
Both
both of the
Useks.
both of the Usyk fights. I think Joshua White, the initial one, was probably pay-per-view worthy. And then beyond that, which other fights from Joshua?
Well, you'd say that were pay-per-view were worthy, but on paper, when they announced it, everybody hammered it, didn't they? The White one.
Yeah, but that they probably did because it's early in his career, but that was a grudge match, so they can probably get away with it. I'd say Joshua Martin as well, just
All
because
right,
that was Joshua's world title fight.
all right.
I guess the Parker fight was probably pay-per-view as well.
Because there were belts online and they were
Yeah,
undefeated.
but that's not that many. You had the likes of Pulev in there,
Povetkin,
Povetkin, uh,
Eric
Japan,
Molina, Bronx
Arena,
Dick
Brazil.
Brazil.
Like, there's so many of these that subpar opponents fighting against a big British name.
Yeah. Do you feel that Barney Francis and Bean, when they were at Sky, should have stood a bit firmer with some of them pay-per-views and said, look, that's not a pay-per-view, that's a pay-per-view, that ain't a pay-per-view. Do you think that it could have been handled better, or did they just get greedy and overwhelmed by the success of it at the beginning?
It's really hard to answer that question without seeing the books, because it could be that the other shows were such loss leaders that they had to just try and claw money back.
Yeah.
I don't really, yeah, it's hard to answer that question without knowing the facts, but it comes back to the fighter pay. And there was a period where so many fighters were being overpaid to keep them on matchroom rosters, UK promoters rosters, that the only way to put these fights on was to pay the purses was pay-per-view. And there was that period in boxing, obviously, where you had lots of money. PBC had lots of money. Sky and DAZN had lots of money. So I think part of it was, but at the end of the day, you want to build a brand. One of the reasons why Joshua's popularity has dropped and why people haven't watched him, or why people aren't tuning into DAZN now that he's lost his belt to watch him, is because not many people have seen him fight since the early days and the odd non-pay-per-view.
Yeah.
Because not everybody can just afford to pay 20-25 quid every time Joshua's fighting. I mean, it's 50 quid a year to pay to watch Joshua fight, right? If he fights twice a year.
Yeah.
You're going to watch the whole heavyweight saga, and you had Tyson Fury and Dillian White, and into that, you're probably spending 125, 100 plus quid a year just to watch the British heavyweights fighting against opponents.
Like taxing a car, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's a lot of money, and you're coughing it up. You're coughing it up on a regular basis, and when you're watching, it's not as entertaining as you'd hope for. Often it's subpar.
Yeah. I mean, who put Bellew cleverly on? Who said that would a pay-per-view? I mean, shouldn't it be on the fact that they're fighting for a belt and not the fact that they've got beef behind on IFL? I mean, this intense beef thing, it took a life on it of its own on for a decade, hasn't it now?
He has, and it's become so contrived and scripted, right? Because they all hugging each other after the fight in the ring.
Yeah, and do you think that has something to do with the fact that the public have turned off and they're not buying into it all?
Yeah, I think they tried to create some sort of WWE type vibe into boxing, didn't they? That everybody's got a story and everybody's a character and everybody's O'Hara Davis is there with his blonde hair and Belly used this hard man from Liverpool. And what that means is that, essentially what they're trying to create is that everybody buys into these characters and wants to watch these fights.
Well, what I'd like to see us get off this intense beef. Let's get on social media and get beefing. Forget any beef, right? And why don't it just be about like Spencer and Crawford, two guys going at it who can fight?
Yeah, I mean, but there aren't probably enough of those guys. That's part of the problem.
Yeah, okay. Charlo. No, not Charlo. So, yeah, Charlo and Canelo. How would you see winning that, Rico?
You know what? I wouldn't be surprised if Charlo. I mean, Canelo's got to be the favorite, but I wouldn't be surprised if Charlo won that fight, mainly because I don't think Canelo's the same fighter he was 5 years ago. I just don't think, and if Canelo has to come down in weight again, that's not going to help him. So I think for me, I'm rooting. Well, I'm not rooting, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was a. I wouldn't even call it an upset. Would you agree?
I can see Charlo doing him on points, me. Can you?
Yeah, I mean,
Outboxing
look,
him.
speed and everything else, and Canelo's really not. I mean, he's 33 years old, and he's been fighting since the age of 16. He's got over 60 fights, so he's got a lot of miles on the clock, doesn't he?
Yeah,
And yeah, I think a lot of fighters are looking to beat Canelo and make a name for themselves. Because if Charlo can beat Canelo, that would be a really amazing thing on his resume, and that would make him into even a bigger star outside of the boxing world.
yeah. Uh, Campbell, Hands of Foam. What next for him?
Um, I don't really know what they're trying to do with him, right? They were meant to bring him on slowly. Uh, and how many years has he been a pro? Let me just check. He's been a pro since he's only 22 years old, but he's had 13 fights, right? So I think at some point you got to step him up.
Yeah. What about Johnny Horsecock? Can you see him stepping over Bean's body to get to the big seat?
Um, I think Sky are pretty set up, to be honest.
Yeah,
I think they're pretty set up with their team and how everything's going, and I think they've sort of delivered. There's probably few things that could have been done differently, but I think with this team, they aren't spending loads of money and they're putting on decent events and domestic fights. They don't have many sort of world champions or many people that people are super excited about, but at least they're putting on. It reminds me a lot of the days when Matchroom were putting on these British fights, and you see them sort of up and comers, and they've got really good sort of cruiserweight division. Um, they've got some really good fighters in that, so I think they are in a good position, and I don't really see why Johnny Nelson would end up in any other position that he's been in. And I think he's actually become better since he's not Matchroom anymore. He's
yeah.
less of a cheerleader.
Is Johnny's become less of a company man and more a bit more outspoken, isn't he? And so he looks like shackles were on Johnny when Matchroom were there, doesn't it, at Sky?
Well, as we know, they've all been given the script. So even if you think about who's now on the DAZN commentary, it's a lot of the people that are Matchroom cronies, and essentially it's the same crew that were on Sky, give or take one, two people. They moved from being cheerleaders for Matchroom or Sky to becoming cheerleaders on DAZN, and all the idea of having all this great commentary team and the best team in the world to bring real insights and real analysis, that's all out the window.
Yeah, it is. It's Big Freeze and Dave Allen now that the dust has settled. Where do they both go now? Where does It's Big Freeze go?
Um, I think he should probably look to fight for sort of fringe titles like the European or um, maybe like the British or something else.
What fight winner are Adelaide and Wardley?
Yeah, I mean that would make sense, right? Given the age that he's at, given his development, he's an Olympian. He's had 8 fights. You kind of like to see him step up to that level because he's beaten the likes of the area level guys. He's beaten those. So the natural step is to step into British. Let's say if he was a 25-year-old heavyweight that beaten the guys he's beaten and had, good experience, he'd be ramped up a lot quicker. So given his age, I think they just need to keep pushing him and, put him into big fights and see where he gets at.
Could you
And
see go on.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, could you see Adrian Mole trying to sign Fabio Wardley? Because he hasn't got a deal with Eddie, apparently, has he? Wardley.
I think Wardley's a good signing for anyone, right? He's fairly likable. He's got a good fan base and seems like a good guy. So I could definitely see people trying to sign him, and why wouldn't they? I mean, Britain's crying out for a young heavyweight to be excited about. I mean, Dubois, he lost the fight against Usyk. He can still come again, still a young guy, but there's not much to be excited about in boxing. And, Wardley's one win away from being sort of touted as a good prospect in the division.
Yeah, one more good win for Wardley and he could be top 15, couldn't he?
Yeah, I mean, the guy that's missing is Martin Bakole, right?
Yeah, Martin Bakole, Yui, Fabio Wardley, Adelaide, it's Big Freeze. All them five are in mix, aren't they, really?
Yeah, but I think with Bakole, I mean, he's 30 years old. He's beaten Tony Yoka. He's definitely a type of player. He's definitely a type of boxer that you need to be pushing now and seeing what they're capable of. Beating Yoka's a big feat, right? So now the momentum has sort of stalled since that fight.
Yeah, it's the Gad, Simon Jordan, the Judge Jordan, Jug Ears, aka the Bench, the Talk Sport Bench. Do you think that after all that heavy fire breathing last 12 months, do you think it's all fizzled out and they've all got back in line?
Simon Jordan, I think he's quite combative in general. Him and Eddie clearly don't see eye to eye about things. I think it's good that he's calling stuff out. I think, not everybody in the panel is a boxing expert. And I think with the Gad has always been a company man beyond belief. And, he serves all the masters, not just one.
Yeah, it's the Gad's obviously team PR man for Queensbury and Tyson Fury, and he knows that, doesn't he?
Yeah.
But I think Jug Ears has gone the same route on it now. He's gone a bit anti-Ben and a bit anti-Hearn, and he's sort of like fallen in line with Queensbury and a bit like Judge Jordan. Do you feel that they should just try and be neutral and they'd be a lot better at the job, Rico?
Yeah, they should. But, part of the problem in boxing is the media is so entrenched with the fighters. So if you look at football journalists, used as example, they're not hanging around on the weekends with the players. They've got that level of impartiality because they aren't upsetting their friends or people they go for drinks with or people they go for dinner with. So I think that's the problem in British boxing media. It's so incestuous with the actual establishment that it's hard to actually differentiate who's meant to be here holding people to account versus who's part of which team. So I think you need that impartiality, but that's always been the problem with boxing, particularly in this country, is that, the promoters control the access. So everybody wants to be friendly to promoters and they won't give interviews of people that are combative like you or, are honest about what they're seeing. So what you end up getting is this choir of cheerleaders, which makes it even more harder to really believe anything that's said.
Yeah, well, I was looking earlier online and I was looking at, right, let's have a look who's getting the interviews with all the big hitters. There's about 28, 29 people who basically all do 50,000 plus interviews within 2 days. And these 29 people are interviewed by about 8 outlets. I'm not going to mention
Yeah.
them. We know who they are, and we know who works for these outlets. So when you're seeing the same old people interviewing the same 29, 30 people, right? And then you're seeing them going for dinner together and hanging around hotel lobbies together and drinking coffee together and chewing
Yeah.
fat together. We're never going to get proper questioning because there's no professionalism. Everybody's everybody's pal. He's me pal. He's a pal of mine. It's utter bullshit, isn't it? Because when they walk away, they can't stand the sight of them people. But they'll say it because they want to get on camera. A bit like that. Who is it? We're not going to mention his name. We know who he is now. The YouTube channel that's making a big splash in his old bill. He's a copper, right? But they've got a big following, so everybody's going to put up with it. Where's anybody's morals anymore? Whatever happened to what's right?
Yeah, I mean, the media is there to hold the establishment accountable in any sports. That's the idea. And to see and to speak what they see and to call out bad behavior. And that's the problem is in boxing, you're part of that bad behavior, law of the boxing media. You're you're sort of implicated in a little bit. I mean, even if we think about all the coverage around MTK, it was only the non-boxing journalists that were already covering that story, right? There's a few, I mean, you could say like Matt Christie from Boxing News and others were covering it, but too many others were just not covering or giving it any airtime because it didn't suit the establishments or the boxing power brokers sort of narratives. And that's really where the problems come in, right?
Mm. Matt Christie's a bit of a renegade, isn't he, really, for promoters at the moment? Isn't he? He seems to be ruffling a few feathers, doesn't he?
Yeah, which is good. I mean, that's what you should be doing. I
Yeah,
mean,
that Craig
boxing.
Stott as well. He's ruffled feathers last few months, hasn't he?
Yeah, exactly. But as he said in the column, that he's going to take a bit of a break because it's, you know how it is. Everybody starts calling you and getting upset, and you know this better than most. So
Yeah, God.
sometimes it's
The
not. If
basis,
you're
mate,
doing it as
right?
a hobby, is it worth it? Like
Yeah. Yeah, it's
you don't need people crying down on the phone or hunting
crying
you
down.
down and getting angry.
I don't think mine's anybody crying down phone, usually screaming.
Well, exactly, screaming down the phone and getting upset that they were mentioned. But they happy, the thing in boxing is right. People are happy for other people to get kicking, but when they get kicking, they get very upset very easily.
Yeah, it's a sport unlike any other, Rico. What did you think to IFL's breaking news day before yesterday? Big massive thing came up on the social media, and it said, and I thought, oh, it must be Conor Benn's 270-page dossier that's been revealed because it said breaking news, and it had a picture of Ngannou with a T-shirt of Fury laid on floor in a ring against Wilder and at first fight. How's that breaking news? You think, a big media entity, 850,000 subscribers, and they are hard workers, but you think something would be a bit more breaking news than that, wouldn't you, pal?
Well, it's all they aren't. Again, they're not covering the sport. They are fans of some of the fighters, and everything they do is with that in mind.
Yep. Okay. You want to go on to part two, pal?
Yeah, let's do that.
Cheers, mate.
Cheers.
Would you like to join us on part two, where we are going to rip it up, Snoop Doggy Dog style? I hope you enjoy the profile picture on here. It's Mr. Andrew Bullcroft, aka Steffi Bull, a ginger man with a ginger village people tash. Now, this is how I look at it. If I were running around my village with a mustache like that, nobody would want to be my friend. Well, but each to their own. Pop, pop, bang on that one, Steffi.